going to get started. We're going to start with mine. Pam?
Susie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Strengthening SOAR Application. The topic is Case Development, the Ultimate DDS Experience. You may be aware this was to be the second of 3 webinars in this series. Last week, our topic would have focused on collaborations with SSA in developing a SOAR process. This has been rescheduled for January 30th, so it may seem a bit out of order to be discussing DDS collaborations ahead of SSA, but I assure you, you will have a good conversation which will be helpful for building relationships with all of our key partners. Today's webinar is presented by SAMHSA SOAR Technical Assistance Center at Policy Research Associates, on contract to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. My name is Pam Hine, Senior Project Associate of the SOAR TA Center, and I'll be moderating today's event. I'd like to introduce Robert Grace, Public Health Advisor with SAMHSA Center for Mental Health Services, Homeless Programs Branch, and the Contract Office for SOAR, who will give our welcome today.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to be here representing SAMHSA. And again, the webinar series is to share what we know works, strengthening SOAR applications. Today's webinar will focus on the key role each Division of Disability Determination Services, or DDS, DDB or DDS, plays in fully developing quality SOAR applications. We hear from a SOAR provider and DDS specialist. Speaks about their collaboration and share how your SOAR program can develop better relationships with DDS. So let's start with the conversation, and thanks again for joining us. I'll turn you back over to Pam Hine. Pam?
Great, Robert. We appreciate your support for SOAR and doing our welcome. Just a disclaimer before we start, we'd like to remind you that this training is supported by SAMHSA and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The content of this presentation does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA or DHHS. This training should not be considered a substitution for individualized care and treatment decisions. Some housekeeping items before we begin. Your lines will be muted throughout the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for download on the SOAR website in about a week. Now you may download the PowerPoint slides to follow the webinar. If you look at the top of your screen, you can go to the icon File, Save, then Document to download materials. You'll receive a brief evaluation at the conclusion of the webinar that we ask you to complete. And finally, we will save all questions until the end of the presentation, and we'll review instructions for asking questions in the chat at that point. Just a learning objective, it's our intention that by the end of this webinar, you will learn about case development best practice strategies from both a SOAR practitioner, state lead, and DDS specialist. Also, understand what you need to begin and sustain a strong relationship with DDS. And lastly, through sharing success stories, you'll learn how strong relationships with your DDS can lead to positive outcomes for SOAR applicants. To our agenda, first, I will just write a brief introduction to our webinar series, for which there are 3. Then you'll hear from Lauren Gallegly, a SOAR specialist and SOAR state lead from the Star Day Resource Center in Phoenix. He'll talk about how he's been able to develop strategies to develop a really strong DDS partnership. Then hear directly from Jack Keene and Tracy Jin with DDS in Phoenix, Arizona. And we will have plenty of time for questions. just to, give you a highlight as to why we found that it was important to bring back the 2011 webinar series, it's because you asked for it. Based on the webinar evaluations that we asked you to complete at the end of each one, about 80% of you wanted more webinars on these three topics, and in this order: completing quality SOAR applications, writing quality MSRs, medical summary reports, and medical development, in that order. So we thought it would be great to bring it back and discuss how to develop those SOAR relationships with SSA, work with your DDS, and we'll round it out at the MSRs. So what you'll learn today, you'll be able to replicate it, or a portion of what makes sense for you, back in your own communities. Over the years, we have collected so many stories which tell us that SOAR is really a community effort which has best practices. Folks lead each other when things may not be going well. They blend resources. And we find that when folks move around the country, that SOAR community comes in handy when you're looking for a job. And, that peer-to-peer networking that is so important to be able to do SOAR and to do it well. So this webinar series is going to focus on building collaborations and being able to form these local relationships that will really help to sustain your SOAR programs and have positive outcomes for those you serve. So I'm going to hand it over to Lauren Gallegly with the Lodestar Day Resources Center, Phoenix, Arizona. Lauren, away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Gallegly. I am the Arizona State SOAR lead now. Here in Arizona, I was the local Maricopa County lead for the last 3 years, and kind of was the first one in the state of Arizona to actually do SOAR through my agency, the Lodestar Day Resource Center. So we kind of had to build our program from ground up. And part of it was trying to establish some kind of relationship with the Social Security Administration and DDS. Today, just wanted to kind of talk to you guys kind of about what we do here in Phoenix and of ensuring quality claim submissions and applications, as well as kind of how that interacts with the relationship with DDS and some of the fun things we've been able to do together to help out the population. So you guys are seeing right here is actually one of the clients that I helped. She was homeless at shelter for a good 10 years, the entire duration that our agency has been in existence, and she's kind of been on our list to help for a very long time. We just had to be creative with her, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about her story towards the end, but kind of wanted to open up with it because you can see kind of the picture says it all. We were able to, through our liaisons with the SSA and DDS, get her not only SSI income but housing, and that picture there is when she's looking at her permanent supportive housing complex, which you can kind of see the little apartments on the side, and in the middle is the entrance. So it's kind of a cool day, and I think this kind of puts in perspective what we're actually doing to help individuals when we do get them income. So I'll be talking about her at the end. Let's begin by identifying SOAR clients. I think the first thing that is to much of our success here in Phoenix in terms of foster relationship with DDS, as well as just trying to help the right kind of people, is knowing the population that we're trying to assist. So when we first got it, we not have a pre-screening tool. There's a couple different communities across the United States that do have a pre-screening tool, but we found that we kind of wanted to develop one personally here, specifically with our agency, since we kind of get referrals all over the place. And so one of the first things we did was develop a pre-screening tool. And one of the handouts we're going to have is kind of a case manager referral guide to send clients over to us if interested in SOAR. So if there's other agencies out there that feel like they have a client that would make a good SOAR client, have some of those systems set in place so we're able to properly identify some of the people that really do need the help. Just we have such a large volume here in Phoenix that we really had to kind of decide who needed it the most, just because we need more case managers. Another, educate service providers about SOAR basics and proper referral into the program. So there's all kinds of different subpopulations within good SOAR clients. You have the seriously mentally ill, you have those with traumatic brain injuries, sometimes developmentally delayed. There's all sorts of different types of clients out there that do need assistance, and since mental illness affects everyone differently, we kind of thought that we needed to go out to various service providers and do like SOAR presentations and say, hey, we think your agency kind of has a lot of clients that can benefit from this. We're willing to accept some of those clients on as our clients through the SOAR program. We want to kind of talk to you about it, to what a good SOAR client might actually look like. So that's something early on we really wanted to narrow down to decide and say, hey, you know, we want to help everybody, but we really want to be able to do a good job, submit quality applications, and have some good to go over to the SSA and DDS when we very first started, so we can say, hey, this program's working, it's effective, and it's helping people. We've established relationships with community providers for referrals. So I get referrals literally everywhere. So different outpatient primary psychiatric providers, hospitals, the jails, DOC, the agency that makes actual determinations has referred clients directly to me. The SSA has referred clients to me when they get them sometimes at the field office. So I've really gone out and just said, hey, you know what, we didn't have those contacts when we first started. So the very first things we kind of had in our agenda is to go out and say, hey, we're here, we exist, we want to help. And so we did that early on, and we mainly operate based on referrals now at this point. So it's kind of cool. And it's, like I was just saying, go where your people go. Go to some of the places that I get referrals all the time from, the jails, prison, problem-solving courts. So if there's some kind of or mental health court at a city level, or sometimes even a county level, those are some of the places where SOAR clients might be kind of hanging out. So if you are able to establish some kind of relationship with that agency, you can kind of set up some kind of referral structure. And a lot of times, those people are already interacting with your agency or through your coordinated entry center, to where you're helping the same people. Why not try to identify them a little bit earlier before they hit homelessness, if they're still incarcerated or if they're wrapped up in the legal system? Well, as hospitals, I had a couple referrals from local hospitals now to get their social workers refer clients to me, and then that social worker helps the liaison to get their internal doctors complete the co-signed MSR, so they complete a residual functional capacity form for us. So it really a long way to get those quality referrals. You have good, solid medical evidence, and you have a doctor willing to advocate for the approved. Outpatient providers, that's the difference in my clinics here locally, or sometimes just general mental health clinics. They could be literally anywhere. So substance abuse programs, domestic violence shelters, trying to go some of the different places we've received referrals, but we're really just we have the freedom through our agency to kind of go where the people are. And I can't stress that enough. If you're new to developing a SOAR program, or if you're thinking about, God, where can I find what makes a good SOAR client, just try to figure out early on where those people exist. They're already there. They're already tied up in these systems, a lot of times cycling through them. So if you have those mutual clients, go have those conversations with those different providers and those agencies. And we have nothing but love doing that here locally in Phoenix. Let's see. The medical records. Follow the paper trail. So one of the things early on that I had to learn as a SOAR case manager was how our local behavioral health system operated. I had no idea. I was relatively new to the field at the time, and I really wanted to learn where the evidence lied. Since we go for initial applications and reconsiderations, a lot of what clients approved is going to be on the quality of the evidence. And so a basic or good understanding of how your local behavioral health system works, you're going to know where it exists. So, for example, the SMI determination process. So figuring out how people in your community are determined seriously mentally ill is a good thing to know. In Phoenix, we have one agency that does the actual assessment. We have another agency that does the determination itself to determine if someone's eligible for services. And then also have the Regional Behavioral Health Authority as well as the actual outpatient providers that are contracted with them. So right here you have 4 organizations, 4 different sources of quality medical evidence that you don't know exists can actually possibly hinder a client's that approval, because DDS might not know where all the evidence is as well if they're not able to discover it, or if they're unfamiliar with it, as well as if they don't know where to look, that evidence is there and it's not going to get on file for the actual claimant. So I think it's important to kind of just have an understanding of how it is locally in your community. The process is another example of kind of knowing how your system works. So if you have different agencies in your community that do the 72-hour hold, or that are being petitioning people for DTS, DTO, or a person acutely disabled, I think it's important to understand that just basically how that system works, because when you go as a SOAR case manager to get medical records, you're going to get them not only from where they have that evaluation at, that evaluation, but also if they do get sent off for inpatient hospitalization, that makes really good evidence. A lot of times, most of the time, you're going to have acceptable medical sources all throughout the medical records, and it's going to demonstrate a person's low functioning, being that they did have to be petitioned involuntarily and then hospitalized subsequently. So I think it's really important to kind of just have a working understanding of that process as well. Same with court-ordered treatment. Is your client getting injections versus pills? Do they have a history of being on court-ordered treatment? It's important to kind of figure out what's the longitudinal evidence, they call it, that's associated with this person, to say, hey, look, this person's been wrapped up in the system for several years now, on court-ordered treatment multiple times. That's all good stuff in terms of trying to advocate for your client and ability to work full-time for substantial gainful employment. So to understand that process as well. Hospitals and psychiatric units, where your client in the community, know where the detox centers are versus the actual kind of more longer-term hospitals where people might go for 2 weeks or a month or 2 at a time, because different places are going to have different quality of existing evidence for your claimant. So a detox center might not make the best evidence as compared to maybe a hospital stay where someone was for about 2 weeks or so. So I think it's important to kind of that early on, especially when you pre-screen clients, because you want to know up front kind of where that paper trail exists, and if it doesn't, and you feel the person really needs sort of level of support, assistance applying for Social Security, sometimes you have to go and create it and help connect them to care to those appropriate facilities. The justice system is a big one here locally in Phoenix. We have a very high population of homeless SMI adults in our jails here locally in Maricopa County. And what we've done is we've actually established a pre-release agreement with our jails through the Social Security Administration to where we can provide someone for disability benefits 90 days prior to pre-release throughout the jail system. So hopefully reduce recidivism as well as capture them before they return to homelessness, connect them to care, get them income, and hopefully housing as well. With the justice system here locally, we have something called restoration and competency. So it's accused sometimes of stuff like criminal passing or in some cases assault or other crimes, try to see if they are restorable to competency, if they're going to be deemed criminally incompetent or not. We call Rule 11 here locally. Those types of people make really good SOAR clients. Not only that, but here locally, all that information is public record. So as I'm screening someone, I can go to our Superior Court Minute website here locally and see if that person was in fact restorable to competency, which means they'll understand the charges against them. It means there's probably some kind of psychosis or cognitive impairment or something that's going to indicate low functioning. And so then to make good SOAR clients because there's good evidence that goes along with them. Are acceptable medical sources likely to be? That's the question that I ask myself when I pre-screen clients, because I know DDS is looking for quality applications. They're looking for a very specific criteria found in the book. Some of what we do when we pre-screen clients is we do use the public record searches for third-party collateral or even discover sources. So with the Superior Court Minutes, we can see record, if someone was not able to be restored to competency, we can see if they're SMI, if they're connected to the REBA. That's all actually information here locally. And so I'm particularly sure how it is in other communities, but definitely try to get familiar with what your local public record searches look like. And the Arizona Department of Corrections website is tremendously helpful for a client that's been incarcerated at AZDOC. Our public record website, what kind of work programs they were in, where they housed, what their class level was. So you can see where they housed in a mental health unit, which means they probably did a higher level of care while incarcerated. You can see, this person wasn't working while they're incarcerated for the last 5 years. I wonder why that is. So it's all good indications right off the bat before you get those records that, hey, this person might demonstrate low levels of functioning to warrant some kind of SOAR assistance, and it's going to have that quality medical evidence on file that DDS is looking for. The thing that I do is I create a medical record log to track my record requests and measure response times. At any given time, I will have sometimes up to 40 to 50 medical record requests out at once. And so, while you kind of figure out hospitals, which providers take longer than others, which ones you have to call multiple times to try to get records, or maybe they didn't get the fax, or email requests to different providers. So we create a log that just says basically the provider name, the date of the request, how we sent the request, such as fax or email, in person or physical mail, and then the date that we received the records, because then you can kind of tell over time what to anticipate. You're working with clients and you're setting that protective filing date, and you have a 60-day time frame to get all those records for an SSI client. It helps you pace yourself and know what to do and kind of what to expect when you're working with new clients. Establish relationships too with different service providers and the medical record department. I can't stress this enough. Send them a Christmas card. Do something fun for them if you can. Go visit them in person. If they don't get a lot of visitors from other people that are agencies, especially doing SOAR, a lot of them, when I tell them what I do in person, they really like it. They understand it. They want to help. And so one of the things that they've been doing with us locally here is expedited requests. Sometimes I will get a medical record request within minutes of sent via email or secure encrypted email through some providers, or just because they kind of recognize there's kind of a brand recognition with locally here through certain providers where they understand, okay, yeah, if this person's coming through this program, they really need some help. And so the quicker we get records, the quicker we can submit a claim, the quicker someone gets approved and gets income. If you place this relationship, sometimes an ease of sending new requests. For example, we're able to email a lot of different medical record departments directly, and we put faces with those people, and they recognize our names, and so they're more willing to do those requests a little bit quicker, or they have questions. If there's something we under this piece of information, they'll call us and just say, hey, and ask us a question about it and get it resolved kind of quickly. So super great resources that I cannot stress how important it is enough to really get on good terms with your local medical record department. And I think one of the biggest things is a recognition for how much they too can help others, even if they're just behind the scenes doing work and fulfilling requests. They really do play a big role in the SOAR process, as any SOAR case manager knows that you can't do too much until you get the records and be able to write that MSR. So it's really important to kind of know people are in those departments, search out, and if you're doing a SOAR presentation to a provider, to maybe include that medical record department. Say, hey, part of ask to work with you guys and see if we can't expedite medical record requests. You get the records, medical summary report. One thing that I've done that's been beneficial is I've created an assessment worksheet to kind of paint a picture and fill in the gaps that are missing from the medical records. On the SOAR website, there is an assessment worksheet. I've created one modified based on that. But some medical records, as anyone who's done a SOAR claim will know, don't always tell the full story. Maybe a client that you see day in and day out really has these fixed paranoid delusions about certain things that is impacting their concentration, persistence, and pace, or getting along with others and different things. Sometimes that's not documented very well in records, especially if they're not going for treatment consistently. And that's part of the problem. Maybe they don't have good insight into their psychosis or their schizophrenia. So it's really your job to kind of go into their world a little bit. And agency, we're not treating people, so we're kind of more into trying to advocate for them and help them describe the things that they're experiencing as an advocate to Social Security because they're unable to work in our eyes. It really is kind of important to understand their world and to be able to paint that picture, the demographics, and might not be involved in the medical records because maybe it's not necessarily part of the treatment in terms of getting to know these individuals, but it is in terms of their everyday functional life. What I've done over time is to develop SOAR, I call it a skeleton, to outline important parts of the assessment, medical records, third-party evidence, to kind of the entire report, the psychosocial or the MSR. Just makes me to kind of narrow it down in different categories. So like substance use, I'll put all the evidence I have into the substance use kind of category. The psychiatric symptoms or medical history or work and educational history, all these different subheadings I will create in this skeleton that's just really scratch notes in a Word doc file, real basic. Where if I have that, I can print that out and type my entire MSR based on just those notes that I've either written down working with the client or that I've pulled from going through 5,000 pages of medical records or public records and things like that. That way the evidence is in one place on this skeleton, and I can write my report based on that kind of sequentially, and it makes the writing a little bit more fluid and I think easier to do right on. So basically at that point you have your outline with quotes and significant clinical findings in medical evidence. And so the way once I go to write my MSR, it already mimics disability examiner notes inside of what's called a disability determination explanation. And don't know what that is, that's something I would write down and make a note of, because every time I submit a SOAR claim, with a decision on file, whether it's an approval or a denial, I contact the Social Security Administration and I obtain what's called a disability determination explanation, a DDE. What this is that the internal records, actual disability examiner at DDS, the medical consultants, the medical evidence they received, kind of why it's getting approved or denied. Personally, I call it a report card because it helps me figure out what I can do better for the next claim, such as like if I had a client that was denied for substance use, for example. Now for the next time I might have a similar client, what I might be able to do differently based on disability determination explanation. And when I go to write my MSR, I try to format it in a way similar to DDE, because it's something that DDS hopefully is already kind of familiar with formatting, so it makes it easier to read and hopefully make a favorable decision for us. A major of the related DDS is we like to have our claims ready to go. When I submit the SOAR claim, the intention of it, and probably 99% of the time this is true, is they're ready to be worked. So they're able to get claims sometimes approved in 6 and 10 days is because of this slide right here. We're able to get that MSR co-signed by an acceptable medical source, or sometimes the doctors shy away from that and are in its place to complete what's called a residual functional capacity, an RFC. Have these things on file when you claim to DDS. It's going to DDS's job a little bit easier, in my opinion, because the claim's ready to work. It's ready to go right off the bat. And not that, but perhaps it doesn't have the best medical evidence. You might need to go to what's called a consultative exam to see one of the Social Security doctors, as you might hear different clients describe it. If you have your MSR co-signed, if you have an RFC form signed by an acceptable medical source, 9/10 in my experience, of that consultative exam, which means that the claim is probably going to have a decision on it a lot quicker than waiting for that exam to be scheduled. And to go to an exam, the disability doctor to submit their opinion, their RFC form, that DDS to close out the case and you to have a decision. So you can see right there how much time that actually really does save. as if the form is completed by a treating source, it's someone that's already familiar with the client compared to someone that might meet them in a consultative exam for 30 or 45 minutes, which is a good thing. So, and it's not necessarily a bad thing either, but if you do have those forms signed up front, it does make your time go a little bit quicker than if you have them go out for a consultative exam. So case development. So some of the things that I consider and that I think others should consider when ensuring a quality claim is being submitted to DDS. So I cannot stress enough the quality of the evidence. Like we were talking about earlier, know where your clients are, know the services that they're utilizing within your community. Are there acceptable medical sources there? So for example, if your client's always at detox for maybe 24 hours to sleep off use or alcoholism, are there MDs there? Is there going to be a DO there or a PsyD or different acceptable medical sources on file? Or is there going to be mainly just people there to kind of help treat withdrawal and substance use in an acute setting and take people out once they are detoxed and a little bit more able to function? And so that's just kind of an example of, is that really good medical evidence to document, let's say, schizophrenia? Perhaps it's a subjective call to make. Perhaps it's good to see if there's urinary drug testing. But that compared to maybe a longer-term hospital or an outpatient primary psychiatric provider, I think it's important to know what kinds of doctors or medical professionals these places are employing, because if you have someone that's connected to care and in a couple of years anyway, they only had a nurse practitioner that had the medication and acting as their primary psychiatrist in a way, that's not an acceptable medical source. That's going to change here in a couple months, but for a couple of years, that was kind of an important thing to note. So I think it's important to know where your clients go and what kind of providers they employ. Those hospitalizations is important. Kind of tells you based right off the bat the level of functioning if you're pre-screening a client for the first time and you say, well, how long were you in that hospital for? You can kind of gauge a little bit, okay, were they there for a suicide attempt? Were they just detoxing? Was it they weren't taking their medication? Do they have fixed delusions? Different things like that. Kind of just gives you as you go into the claim when you first meet somebody. And that will kind of say, okay, I think some quality evidence is going to exist here because this person was court-ordered to go to this hospital for 30 days. So I think it's important to know kind of how that system works and why your clients go there. And see on this slide, the frequency of service utilization and longitudinal evidence. So those are terms I've seen DDS use in their reports, because sometimes clients don't go for services. They only go to emergency rooms. Sometimes that's the only evidence you have. If your client is constantly going, that might be an indication of maybe they're paranoid of certain doctors or certain clinics, or they just have really poor insight and someone is bringing them down. Like, they don't want to go to the emergency room, but they get convinced to, and that's the only kind of time that you're going to see doctors. Are they doing that frequently? That's important to note, as well as how long have they been doing this? How long have they been going to hospitals or their patient psychiatric providers? If there's no evidence, it kind of demonstrates that, hey, this isn't situational. It's not an adjustment disorder. It's not because their workman's comp ran out. This person is mentally ill, and there's a documented history that can help prove that. So those are some of the things you can kind of set yourself up front when you're screening clients or as you're working a SOAR claim to kind of be proactive in it, because those are the DDS is going to be looking at. Another thing that recently came across one of my recent denials was consistency. Consistency across the medical records, your SAR, your visual functional capacity form filled out by the doctor, as possibly the consultative exam. So the question asked is, do the diagnoses, the functional impairments, the symptoms, mental status exams, and visualization support your claims argument? So the story that you're telling for the individual you're trying to help, is it consistent? Does the medical evidence support the allegation? What's happened is I will get an MSR or an RSC signed by a doctor, and it might not be totally consistent with the rest of the evidence that I've obtained, or even if I think it is, DDS might think otherwise. So that's something that does come up. So consistency is a really big thing I would note to SOAR case managers out there in terms of DDS is looking for. In terms of a consultative exam, the same thing can happen. They might go to Social Security's doctors, and once they get there, the doctor might see them and say, oh, yeah, this person is so functioning, this and the other. Then they kick their report back to DDS, and DDS says, well, you know what? We think that vendor, that consultative exam doctor, really had a snapshot, they call it, of that person's mental illness, that 30-minute interview or so. So DDS might actually disagree with that consultative exam doctor and say, no, we think that it wasn't a good representation across the consistency of all the evidence. So that's something to consider when you're doing SOAR claims. The address is credibility. The first thing I always try to rule out is malingering, especially if there's personality disorders involved. Trying to rule out, okay, is this person trying to benefits because they have 5 felonies? It's hard for them to get a job, or they're a sex offender, or they're just trying to get some kind of housing benefits if they get SSI, some kind of disability type housing, or they're just exaggerating their symptoms or minimizing substance use along with it. So the first thing we want to do is rule out malingering. See that this person is a credible source, and if that perhaps is going to be reflected across the evidence, as well as the credibility of the first and third party evidence. So looking at the public records, or mom and dad, or the spouse, or the medical doctors, if there is this credibility of kind of all of them that, hey, this person's not just abusing the emergency room system or even the jails, you know, if they're reviewing care for certain things but they keep going back for the same conditions and not cooperating, you know, is that their behavior, or is that because of some other kind of reason that DDS looks at as well? And that versus the fact that your client might be a poor, unreliable historian. Especially, most of my clients probably are poor historians because they don't have good insight. They don't remember what hospitals they've been to. They remember certain things about their life in general, where we kind of have to fill in the pieces of the SOAR case manager. It's important right off the bat to say, hey, we don't want you to think that this claimant is something or inconsistent or credible. No, this person is a poor historian. Look at their mental status exams, for example. That's one way you can kind of demonstrate that. Do they have poor insight into their conditions? Do they have poor judgment? That's important in terms of credibility. And probably one of the biggest things that comes up across all SOAR claims is drug and alcohol abuse versus mental illness. And that's one here. What I did recently is, earlier I spoke of the disability and that you can get from Social Security. And recently I had a client approved, and the disability examiner, the case manager per se at DDS, said that they thought the claimant was not disabled. They wanted to deny her off the bat. So they kicked it up to the medical consultant at DDS, the doctor that makes the decision. And the doctor actually said, no, wait, time out. We actually do think she is disabled, and here's why. The doctor wrote out a list of reasons specifically why this claimant was disabled despite substance use. And so note of that, and I've been using it every time ever since. And this slide and the next slide reflects that. So I have a checklist to consider screening clients or writing an MSR about, is drug and alcohol use material to the disability? Is it all just drugs? Other things you can look at that disability doctor used to get my claimant benefits was a history of mental health diagnosis, documented have lasted the past 12 months. So is there longitudinal evidence that this person does have a mental illness? That a health condition has not been diagnosed as only drug-induced. So again, detox centers or drop-in centers, different things like that that are really short-term, meant to get somebody sober or fix some type of a crisis. Substance use, drug psychosis or different things like that might come. So that's something to look at versus if your client is diagnosed with schizophrenia. To consider is if the primary diagnosis from psychiatric providers is substance use or not. So that does not look good on a SOAR claim. So hopefully, again, it comes back to that consistency across the medical evidence. You might think that, but maybe not all of them. On an assertive community treatment team or an ACT team, which is the best practice to really put a high level of patient care. Or are they described by the clinic as low functioning? Do they really need those higher supports, more resources in the community? Here, do they have extensive use of psychiatric services during the past 5 years or so? And it takes 5 years just to pick it. It could be 2 years, 3 years. Every person's history is a little bit different. But if this person is constantly going for care, it helps demonstrate that, hey, maybe it's not this drug. The history of court-ordered treatment or multiple court-ordered evaluations for different kinds of petitions. This is important because a lot of times they're not going to make it through this system. They're not going to make it past the involuntary evaluation and hospitalizations. If it's on drugs, they're going to get discharged well before that. So that's one way you can advocate for your client by saying, hey, they've been on COT the last 3 out of the 4 years. That can't all just be drugs. If they've been criminally incompetent to stand trial in the jail system or unrestorable to competency, a documented period of sobriety because they've been in jail that whole time, and they've seen at least 2 different psychologists or psychiatrists, and I think it's important to note that as well. If it was just substance use, they probably wouldn't be criminally incompetent. They have a history of psychiatric symptoms for periods of sobriety, so long term of hospitalizations or jail or prison time, those undocumented periods of sobriety, as well as, of course, urinary drug screening always help. All right, some strategies then. Yes, in the local SOAR program. The reason I brought up the MSR, quality of evidence, the MSR, the RFC form, all these different SOAR terminologies. It first started, we didn't know what we were doing. And so kind of the plan for us here in Phoenix was we want to figure out what we're doing. We showed that it works, that it's helping people, that it's measurable in terms of people getting benefits. And then we want to go to SSA and DDS and say, hey, look, and it's helping people. And so to demonstrate success to them, to be a little bit more willing, if not already, to provide some kind of level of assistance for the claimants, because a lot of times they'll get the same people in and out that are homeless and having all kinds of problems, or they're consistently filing applications, but maybe they're not submitting a functioning report or other evidence needed by DDS, so they get technicals enough, but they keep refiling. So some indications that, hey, if we're able to capture these people through SOAR, we actually be helping them out, as well as since we do the online disability reports, we get all the medical evidence up front. We're saving SSA and DDS a lot of time. They've got a lot of people to work with. By doing SOAR with the client, you're able to save them time, and this is a little bit thankful for that. Here in Phoenix, both SSA and DDS have been wonderful for our SOAR program. And I think the primary reason it started out that way was just because we were able to demonstrate its success. We went through SOAR, every SSA field office here in Phoenix in Maricopa County to kind of say, hey, we want to tell you about SOAR to let you know it exists, so that if my claim for some reason gets sent to a field office, you're going to kind of know what the SOAR program is, or hopefully you do, and have a liaison at every field office. If we have questions or things come up, we're able to kind of have a contact on the inside to be able to address those issues. And then, of course, be able to humanize your data through success stories. When it comes down to it, at the end of the day, we're just helping people. And SOAR clients are people that need our help that probably can't do it alone without us. So I think it's important also to be able to share some of your success stories with SSA and DDS. And not only success stories you've had, but also how they were a part of those success stories. I created the Public Relations Officer, which is the title of Jack Keene, who's a part of this panel today. Just said, hey, this is kind of what we're doing. Can I talk to you? Can I pick your brain a little bit? What can I do at a profit agency doing this SOAR program to help make DDS's life easier, to help give you guys medical records and claim evidence in a way that would help us all out. Helps the person out, helps me do my job, as well as hopefully DDS do theirs a little bit quicker because we've done so much work ahead of time for them. So what I wanted to do is reach out to your local public relations officer and say, hey, are you familiar with SOAR? If not, can I tell you about it? Invite them to your steering committee meetings and have them be a part. Just kind of see what they're doing and how they can help and the kind of facility you're having. Community stakeholder, I think, is extremely important. One thing was locally to our SSA field office, I provided them with different homeless resource information. So that way, if they get homeless claimants, SOAR, maybe they already have benefits. Now they have a shelter list to provide them, updated by us through SOAR. Other kinds of resources for clothing or different things like that. Helps give them resources so that they can help individuals that they see. It also identify what supports SSA and DDS might need to assist homeless claimants. So I think it's important to know right off the bat kind of where your claimants are, if they're in permanent supportive housing, or are they technically homeless, or wherever your people might be, to kind of see, okay, how can I help these people? Where do they exist? What am I going to need from the SSA or DDS? Am I going to need a liaison, a claims representative at the field office for the SSA? I need dedicated disability examiners at DDS. It kind of helps you overall in the long scheme of things. It makes it easier for the disability examiners. I like to think it does. Using the Records Express means you send over PDF files of the medical records and updated records and things directly to the examiners. Helps to save time and increase the communication. Coordinating SSA SOAR liaison, I think, is extremely valuable. That way, if there's issues with a particular claim or an onset date, or maybe paperwork didn't get it to DDS, for some reason something happened, now you have a contact on the inside that you can know or that you can call, and you can help coordinate with the DDS. To obtain additional records and update the disability examiner is needed. She worked a claim at Tracy a couple months ago for a claimant who had an onset date kind of far in the past, and the records as I could. I think she hated me for it because there was several thousand pages. But she came to me one day and she said, we're things here in the file that she might have been treated before that. You know, what do you think about this? Is that true? Can you ask the claimant, blah, blah, blah. So she really reached out to me to try to get this person a bit better information on the file to help make a decision on the claim, and it worked out positively. And so that's something that you're going to always get with different disability examiners who are not familiar with SOAR, the program, or the people that you're helping. And so we really collaborated on that case specifically recently. A better outcome, and the claimant was approved. She got a good 18 grand in back payment, and it was really beneficial to hear from DDS to say, hey, they needed more information that can help the claimant. I went and obtained the information, and at the end of the day, I think everybody was happy. A lot of talking. I apologize. I am sick today, so if I rambled, I am sorry. But I wanted to introduce Jack Keene as well as Tracy Jordan, both from DDS. Jack Keene is the Professional Relations Officer, and Jordan is a disability examiner or adjudicator here in Phoenix that is dedicated to SOAR claims. So without further ado,
Bear with us. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties.
Hi.
now.
Okay. It looks like we're not going to be able to get Jack and Tracy on this webinar. Hopefully they both will be able to call in shortly. But I wanted to have Lauren talk a little bit about the DDS and SOAR collaboration because that didn't happen overnight. It took some effort on the part of the local SOAR program. As Lauren said, he went around to many of the SSA offices to get their SOAR process agreed upon and implemented. And once it got to DDS, if Lauren can talk about that, how dedicated DDS case analysts, as well as the medical consultants, because in your stories that you told, both play a key role in really moving the case along. A little bit about that?
Absolutely. So basically, DDS SOAR collaboration, like I said, personally, what I did was I went to DDS and said, hey, I've got this SOAR program. I'm supposed to do something with it. Can you help? We had some claim successes like that. I had a basic understanding of the disability process enough to kind of feel like I know what I was talking about. And, you know, what can we do to make this successful? When we got to talking, Jack said to me, well, what about if we had dedicated disability examiners, the people that are like basically cases for DDS, the people that your case managers are talking to that are working that claim, going through the medical records and kind of reading MSR and giving their opinion on if the person meets the listing or not. Absolutely, that would be phenomenal. And then recently we took it a step further and we were a dedicated medical consultant, which is something I don't think I can talk after that. A medical consultant is the actual doctors through DDS that make the decision or not your client's going to get approved for benefits or not. And so I think that is extremely helpful and is what I have for every single SOAR program out there to try to get dedicated examiners at least, if not dedicated medical consultants. And to be honest, I don't know how common that is, but I'll tell you the success that we've had with that has really improved, in my opinion, not only sending better quality claimants or DDS, because of the training process, but a little bit more confidence because I'm working with people that understand the population we're working with, and DDS knows that we're SOAR trained. We understand a little bit about the Blue Book and different criteria that we're trying to meet right off the bat. So we get together and we collaborate on different things. I have plenty of stories that I could tell about if we did not have that relationship with DDS. I would perhaps not have the outcomes I had, if not have them as difficulty that sometimes you get with different examiners that might not give you a call back, or that you call and say, did you get this evidence, or I wanted to update it, and then you figure out it's not there, or there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. So I think collaboration is extremely vital to a successful SOAR program. I'm so thankful for it here locally. So what we do, after we talked to a little bit, and we had some success examples to show them that this is working, and we feel like we know what we're doing through SOAR. We set a program with the SSA to notify DDS when a claim has been transferred. So what happens logistically, I take my big stack of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 pages sometimes down to the SSA. I'm not able to scan it in, and to my dedicated SOAR contact at the SSA field office. She then has to transfer it to DDS, and sometimes they mail it, sometimes she scans it in. They get depends on the claim. But once she does that, she then notifies Jack, in our case, DDS, our public relations officer, and he does that, and he's able to help ensure that it gets assigned to our DDS examiners and there. So I think it's important to kind of have that SSA DDS conversation right off the bat, because once you submit it to SSA, it's kind of out of your hands. So you're up to the SSA to get it to where it needs to go. So if some kind of a system like that in place, then you're able to get that claim transferred and ensure that it does get to the people that understand SOAR. Again, like I was saying, DDS assigns dedicated claim examiners and medical consultants to our claims because they're familiar with the SOAR claims. They're familiar with pre-release claims. They have a claimant that is currently incarcerated. They can consultative exam if that's needed. So if they have to see one of Social Security's doctors, probably not going to happen, and it defeats the purpose of having a pre-release agreement if they have to wait till they get out to see the doctor. So I think it's to have that conversation with DDS and say, hey, other communities have this. Is this something that you're able to do for us? What will we have to do to get your attention? And I got it was to demonstrate the success and the knowledge that we have locally with our population, with the disability process, and the success and the housing success we've had. And it's for us. So hopefully it'll work for you guys as well. At least as a starting point if you're trying to get your program off the ground. DDS examiner in consultation with the medical consultant and SOAR case manager might still order a consultative exam. If that happens, a lot of times they come down to our office. We have down here at our shelter what I'm just going to call a Social Security doctor come to do consultative exams. And when they do that, I think it's pretty cool that they're willing to come out to us. My success story I'll share in a second is he actually did it in my chair at my desk in my office for a very high needs client. And without that, I would not have been successful. And I would have been able to do that if it were not for my relationship with DDS. So you can kind of see the ins and outs of why this relationship is important on a direct practice basis. It really does make a difference if you're able to have a conversation with DDS and say, hey, look, a lot of times our clients aren't going to be able to make it to appointments, or they are scared to get in a car with my case manager. That's part of their delusions or some kind of psychosis. And so they might be willing to work with you because at the end of the day, it's about helping people and get them through the disability process. It's going to hopefully help get them helping and end their homelessness and not apply for disability again. So the publications officer plays a key role in the state steering committee. We have early meetings here in Arizona. DS is usually present, SSA is present. We have all kinds of different federal, state, and local agencies and community stakeholders that come, and they help to maintain quality through applications. So as we're doing so across the state, across the county, we want to ensure the integrity of the SOAR program that, hey, if you dedicated claims representatives and dedicated disability examiners and medical consultants, we want to make sure the applications submitted by SOAR-trained case managers that know what they're doing, that's maybe being reviewed by a local lead or their supervisor or the state lead or whatever the case might be, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page for identifying good clients, to focus on those that are low functioning and that are at risk of homelessness. DDS helps to provide SA policy updates to SOAR providers' needs. There's a lot of changes at DDS with mental health listed in the Blue Book that I think will be talked about towards the end here. It's gone out in several of the emails. So I think it's important to be aware of those updates, as well as any problems submitting a claim to the SSA as a SOAR case manager and going to DDS. A lot of feedback is good, and these committees, these state steering committee meetings are really valuable to have. We're able to present that feedback. Hey, what's working, what's not, what can we do different? Here's some of our, success stories, and here's some of the data that we have. We got, 15 clients approved in an average of 60 days, and we generated $20 in back payments. It's really good stuff to have to be able to take to not only your agency, potential funders and grant writers and things, but also to SSA and DDS to say, hey, look, what we're doing is working, it's helping people, and 10% of those clients are housed now or in an appropriate level of care and not recidivating. They're not back in the hospital. Then they have access to Title 19 or medication. They access to Medicaid in Arizona. So there's different ways to kind of bring back to DDS and the SSA kind of buy into the SOAR program for you locally and how it's really benefiting the community and save community money. It's really expensive to jail someone. So if you have a person that's in a jail all the time, they get disability benefits, they get up to services really well through the SOAR program, then the entire community money at that point. And then lastly, I have today a couple of different success stories, not very in-depth, but I just wanted to kind of leave a good note and kind of remind everybody why we do this. Sorry, my voice is going out. Just kind of a couple of success stories that I have due to DDS and the SOAR program that we have here at the Lodestar Day Resource Center and the LDRC is the quality of evidence. I had claims approved in as little as 6 and 10 days, and yes, that includes weekends. Came back from Christmas, and I had a guy that was approved in 10 days. That included 2 sets of weekends, so that's not business days. I was SOARed, and what I attribute that to is, A, identifying a good SOAR claimant right off the bat in terms of quality of evidence, but B, I was able to get their doctor complete a visual functional capacity to where once DDS got that claim, boom, they went to town on it, they sent it up to a medical consultant, and it was done. It was decided, he was approved, and he's going to be having income with the payee now, and don't always happen without that DDS or kind of coordination. Thing is retroactive SSI back payment in excess of $15,000. So if you're familiar with SOAR and Title 16 SSDI and SSI, for SSI, there's really not back payment. You go back in time like they do for SSDI. But I had a particular client that was working pretty heavily with one of our dedicated ability examiners at DDS, and I was following this claimant in skilled nursing facilities and homeless shelters and literally on the side of the street. And they can, their end, internally in their computer system, that this person applies to the same conditions multiple times. And for various reasons, they keep getting denied. And usually it's like, oh, what can I do different as a SOAR case manager? But this time there was a lot of evidence. They had someone, such as myself, that is able to, as a SOAR case manager, follow them throughout the community, that inability process, but also those kind of mental health. And I don't know the exact reason or how they actually got it. It's a little bit too technical for me, but that examiner, along that claim, while we were in hospitals, and she had to meet with consultative doctors and stuff, and at the end of the day, she was approved, and the approval, she was able to open up a former SSI claim, and we got that person over $15,000 in back payments for SSI, which I thought was pretty phenomenal. I don't know how common that is, but I do know there's usually not back payments for SSI. So something I do attribute to the SOAR collaboration that we have. The thing I wanted to say back on this slide, too, was that so cool. There's a picture on this slide. That's me. And a client of mine that I call my bodyguard. So I don't know how big your guys' computer screens are, but that is huge. And that's someone that I got very recently out of AZDOC and had more than 10 different felonies and a long history of mental illness. And I have records outside of the DOC records to go off of. So what I did in my summary report was I tried to highlight all the things that I possibly could that I found. And what was really, really cool was consultant. The person that decides whether or not your client is going to be approved or not. The introduction to my MSR, word for word, in what's called a psychiatric review technique execution. That's helpful to say. The PRT, I guess they call it. So a little blurb at the end of a disability explanation that every consultant has to write down why this person was approved or why this person was denied. So a lot of times you'll see why they need a listing or why this person couldn't perform relevant work. And in this particular case, they quote the introduction from my MSR word for word. I don't know if they had to type it up because of PDF, they couldn't copy and paste, or what the case might be, but I thought that was really cool. Just a really good example of the kind of and just really cool stuff that you can have if your DDS is familiar with you and your SOAR program. And then because of our relationship with DDS, 3 success stories. The Hall of Mirrors there. I had a very psychotic client that was recently housed in a supportive housing unit, and it came time for her consultative exam down at our shelter, which gave me it for DDS to come down to us. And it's going to be an issue, but I could not get her out of her apartment that morning. So I went to the Social Security doctor, and I said, "Doctor, she's right down the street. It's literally a 2-minute drive. I've never met you before, but I do the SOAR program through at DDS and everything like that. I think this client is worth your time. We have a lot of good evidence. Can't get her to come." He looked at his phone, he put his keys down, and he's like, "Let's go to her." And he gets in my personal vehicle, never met the guy before. We drove on the street together, and we come in some kind of gym room or recreational room that was just full of mirrors. We set up a makeshift table, 2 chairs, and he did the consultative exam right there, and it was approved. If done that or had that kind of relationship with DDS, didn't have taken the time to do something like that, the client probably would have been denied for not attending the consultative exam and to reapply all over from scratch. You can kind of see how valuable that DDS relationship is. And again, just like the different slide that we had a picture of the lady looking at the housing, I would get DDS to come use my desk in my office to perform a consultative exam because I had a client that was a little bit too psychotic to really leave our campus to be inside of the shelter itself. And they're willing to come to us because we knew them through SOAR and through DDS, and she got approved. She never would have gotten approved if it were not for that. Fact about that case as well is, in order for her housing, we have a doctor sign off on her housing and disability form. Well, she's obviously disabled. She's receiving SSI, but she refuses to see a doctor in the last 10 years that we've known her. So because of the relationship and they knew who we were and who she was, we were able to have that DDS doctor sign her disability form so she can obtain that housing that you saw in the picture. He had a practice as well. He was able to see her. We got it done. She got SSI, she got housing, and she got connected to care. So it was really kind of cool to see that transpire, and it contributed to our relationship primarily with DDS. And then special patients for high-risk or low-functioning applicants. So sometimes with very violent people or very acutely psychotic people that don't take medication, or even if they do, sometimes the baseline is just very delusional and very paranoid. So yes, it's really worked with us in terms of scheduling or rescheduling, or sometimes counseling the consultative exams for us and saying, you know what, no, we have enough evidence to file. Let's go ahead and make a decision. Because sometimes it's really difficult to get these people to attend an exam, and they don't understand it's in their best interest so that they can have income. And so it has been great to us and willing to kind of accommodate those on a case-by-case basis. Not always, but we have some good reasoning. We have some good evidence to support when we need that help. I'm willing to kind of do some such consideration. So with that, I will take that back to Pam.
Thank you so much for sharing, the stories about how you've really been able to assist individuals in a short amount of time. Likely, they may not have been awarded if you didn't have that special relationship with DS and developing that relationship. So that you are self-trained through the SOAR online course, which is amazing, and you started doing applications. You really understood how to file claims, but by having developed this relationship with DDS, it feels like your skills are even more enhanced, right, because of the DDS relationship. So we thank you for that. Folks on the line may be familiar with Lauren Gallegly through our SOAR Voices blogs and the e-newsletter. We've asked Lauren to share some of these stories so that you can see that it's possible, and you can really help folks through not only understanding how to file claims, but through understanding what DDS needs to be able to make their decisions, as Lauren talked about, understanding materiality, understanding the new revised listings, and other changes in Social Security rules and regulations is really, really important. And I know if Jack was on the line, he would be talking about that, how he is to be able to attend the Phoenix Steering Committee meetings, and at those meetings share what's working, what's not working, troubleshoot some of those issues, because they do have challenges at times, but also update the community on recent changes in Social Security rules and regulations. So I apologize for not being able to get Jack on the line, but I've been texting with him, and he says, Lauren, you're doing quite fine. So now we are going to open it up to questions. So again, thanks again, Lauren. So we have some time for some questions. You can type your questions into the Q&A panel, located underneath the participant tab. So take some questions and see if we can get Lauren to help us out.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Let's see here. Let me get a couple questions. So we have a question about developing your relationship with DDS. At what point in the process were you able to get DDS or establish a DDS dedicated adjudicator? Was it about your applications or the quality of the applications that, DDSC, we'll dedicate folks to look at SOAR claims?
Sure, good question. Basically, because we didn't have an existing SOAR program in the entire state of Arizona, we kind of went into it to demonstrate our success. But at the point we got that, we to get those services from DDS was when we were able to say, hey, here's the different Social Security numbers of the individuals that we helped through the SOAR program. Look at the approvals, the percentage we had. I forget how much it was. It was probably 70-80% or so approval rating when we first did that. And we did have to kind of pick the brain in terms of what does DDS want to look for? That was my question to Jack. What does DDS want to see in terms of in terms of evidence? What can we do to help identify those individuals? And so, we were able to demonstrate the success of the program, and also just kind of say, hey, we want to help you guys out as well, because these are people that are going to apply for Social Security. Hopefully, we want to help them, and we want to make sure we do a good job. So we demonstrate that success.
That's great. Laura, we have a question for you. Do you have your own permission to release information form that is HIPAA compliant? I have been slowed down by providers not accepting our very basic release, simple release form. So do you have your own release form?
I actually made my own. I had the same exact problem when I started. What I had to do is I created my own HIPAA compliant form, and then send for medical record request. All either is use the form, or what I've also done to avoid any kind of headache is what I call a medical record release of information surplus. So where I do a folder on my computer of blank releases of information for all the providers I've worked with the last 3 years I've been doing SOAR. So that way, I have my clients at this point now sign all those releases. That way there's no kickback, there's no slowdown. Medical records is happy, we get the records, so we're happy. And just a letter to explain the SOAR program as the release of information, whether my own or that or the hospital's release of information. So just 2 pieces of paper is all that we fax or email, and that's how we get our medical records. And we've had to pay for them.
Information. What we can do if Lauren is open to it, attach that to the webinar PowerPoint once we get it archived, so you can take a look at it. And on the SOAR website, you will find sample multi-agency releases. Again, so if an applicant is utilizing various providers in the area, this is a release that has been agreed upon and, again, saves time and should be accepted by the provider since they, again, were agreed upon. Here's a question. Most of the time I have to resend all records to DDS because they never forward the whole packet I give them. Also, SSA says if there are more than 15 pages, they will not scan, but will have to be sent by mail. And now I'm assuming that this question means once the claim gets to the DS level, waiting for that barcode to submit them that way, through fax or electronic records. So, Lauren, and you may have experienced this problem. So can you talk a little bit about medical records? Do you submit them with the SSA application? Have you heard about this, that if there's no more than 15 pages? And again, you had mentioned that at one point, for one case, you had 1,000 pages. How did you get those to DS?
Because I was in that same predicament when I started. SSA actually lost 4 or 5 of my claims the first couple months I did. They couldn't even find them. And that's because I didn't have a SOAR contact there. So I heard every single one. But I did have those exact problems as well. So I'm not familiar with only 15 pages scanning to DDS. But what I would recommend is seeing if you can't get that SOAR contact at the SSA and talk to them about what you do, and maybe have DDS get involved too and say, look, this is why we kind of all the medical records up. This is what we're trying to do. And I think it's beneficial that way to have that conversation and not there's all electronic record express or waiting until it gets to DDS and then contacting the ability examiner, the adjudicator, and saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm the appointed representative on file. Can you fax me I think it's a yellow tab, which is the medical record barcode. She faxes it to you, and then you send all the medical records that way as well. There's a couple different ways to do it. Personally, and the thing that I do is I just have the medical records up front with the claim, submit it to SOAR contact at the SSA, and she takes it from there. And I do know that sometimes she'll scan it in, and other times she'll mail it to DDS, because sometimes I'll say to Jack or DDS, the examiner, I'd say, hey, kind of compiled all those records, and the examiner's saying they've got nothing, so can I resend them? Different things like that. And one thing you can do as well is if you have an e-fax, I have an e-fax, which every fax I get comes directly to my email. So it's already in PDF form. You don't have to scan everything. You can go ahead and just send that out with a barcode, or even to Electronic Records Express. So hopefully that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, you gave several solutions in your response. I know if Jack was on the line, he would talk about Electronic Records Express. Jack, as the PRO or Professional Relations Officer, would be the appropriate person at your state DS to actually assist you with enrolling in ERE, because he does that for case managers who do want to submit cases electronically. So I would recommend that you get in contact with your PRO, Professional Relations Officer at your DDS, and if you are not sure who that person is, I would certainly suggest you contact your SOAR state lead or local lead, or your SOAR TA Center liaison, who could assist you with establishing that relationship. Again, it didn't happen overnight, as you could see. The way Lauren submits cases has been kind of adjusted over time. So hopefully that's helpful for you, so that you can try to get those records for no cost. Again, your local Social Security district office may have capacity issues and not have the manpower to be able to enter in the records at that time, which is why they may have restricted you to a small amount of records. So reach out to your local lead, and if you don't have one, reach out to your SOAR TA Center liaison for the state that you are from. So here's a question for Lauren, because I think you may have experienced this. Do we have to receive medical records to write an appropriate MSR? The records sometimes cost money, and we have no payer source.
Good question. So I've got 2 responses for that one. The first response was yes. I've done MSRs based on pretty much no records, just the client's presentation. I had a little old 61-year-old lady, super sweet, and what I had her do is, and she would describe to me why she wanted to apply for disability, she would cry uncontrollably. And the more I heard her talk and establish rapport with her, she was very, very psychotic, very, very polite, cooperative and stuff, but fixed solutions. And so I was like, I don't want to re-traumatize you or anything like that. Why don't we do this? In terms of your Social Security claim, why don't you write a letter? And I did was I had her write a letter, so I would have some kind of form of documentation in her own words about the things that she experiences, how it impacts her everyday life. And so letter, I at least had something. And there she had to go see one of Social Security's doctors for a consultative exam, and she was approved. And it was pretty cool. So that was one way I got around that. The question is, I would try to go to the supervisor of whatever agencies that are trying to charge you for medical records and talk to them. Sometimes on medical record requests, they get kicked back with an invoice. And the supervisor is not going to pay for medical records either. So what I do then at that point is I contact the company, and I'll try to talk to the person on the other end or talk to their supervisor and say, hey, look, we're all in this kind of together. Clients who obtain medical records, so we're not charging them to do any kind of services with them. This is a free program for homeless adults. So a lot of times if you just have that conversation, sometimes with a higher up, you pay medical records. I've done it for 3 years. I probably got in a good 100,000 pages of records, if not more. We've never paid for a single one.
Well, that's really helpful. Also on the SOAR website, we do have a sample medical request letter, which has similar language that we represent individuals who are indigent and don't charge a fee. And you know, hopefully you know about that. And if not, go to our website, the library section, and you can go and print that and adapt it to kind of meet your kind of your unique needs of your program. So that's really great advice too, Lauren. Here's another question that you may or may not have experienced before, but likely you have something along these lines. So this is a question, a client is receiving psychiatric services at the methadone clinic. How do you get around DA&A being listed as the primary diagnosis to get a signature on the MSR? And I'll just clarify, because DA&A wouldn't be listed as a primary diagnosis, but it might be, you know, substance use disorder or polysubstance use or abuse disorder, or substance abuse dependency disorder. So I'm thinking if that is listed, you know, the primary disorder, have you been able to highlight if an individual is receiving psychiatric services, there should be a co-occurring mental illness that's also in there, whether it's bipolar disorder, major depression. So talk, Lauren, if you've had experience where it looks like substance abuse is material or polysubstance use dependency be the issue, but you know there's a underlying mental illness. Talk how you've been able to discuss with the medical doctor who will hopefully eventually sign off on your MSR if you've been able to explain it, describe it.
I do have one case that comes to mind. I had a guy that had a stroke. The effects of it were pretty bad, but he also went to a methadone clinic. So I don't have necessarily a really good answer, but what I was able to do was, that clinic wasn't willing to post an MSR or do an RFC for me. They were willing to do was to, on letterhead, the doctor, in an acceptable medical source, kind of wrote kind of his engagement with the client, what he thought the functional limitations were, and then specifically address the question, how much is substance use versus, in this case, in your case, it might be depression or anxiety or whatever the mental health case might be. But that's the way around that. I just did something ahead that way. It's an accessible medical source. They don't have to worry about diagnosis or anything like that, but it can describe more so the functional limitation of the individual because they are treating them. So that in comparison with the consistency across the other medical evidence they might have, hopefully they have something else. If not, maybe engage them in some kind of counseling or outpatient psychiatric services in addition to. But if they can't do something on letterhead to just describe the functional impairments, maybe not so much the diagnoses, but functional impairments as well as if they're giving feed urinary drug screens and stuff when they go down there to help prove that they're not, doing outside of the methadone. So.
Laura, great response. Again, the methadone clinic, getting those urine screens, and the consistency that you talked about is really important too. Likely we'll find a diagnosis in records other than the methadone clinic. So hopefully that was helpful to you. So with that, we are reaching 4:30. I, again, just want to thank Lauren for presenting when he was not quite feeling well. You gave us some incredible stories and backing it up with, developing that relationship with DDS to submit these quality applications. And so I just, again, want to thank everyone, who's joined our call today. And remember to complete the evaluation. Once you click off, you'll get to it right away. Again, this webinar series is happening because you've asked for this type of information. So please do the evaluation and put down some of your suggestions for other webinars you'd like to see. As a reminder, our second webinar in this series is next Thursday, same time, but we will be talking about medical summary reports, including information about the revised mental health listings and the new medical evidence rule that you received information from us earlier in the week. We'll talk a little bit about that and new acceptable medical sources that are now able to cite an MSR. So again, thanks again, and hope to see you here next week. Bye-bye.